Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Standard this evening. It's so nice to see so many people here. My name's Gemma Rolls-Bentley, and I am the chief curator of Avant Arte. And for those of you who don't know Avant Arte yet, we are a creative marketplace who on a mission to make art radically more accessible. And we work directly with artists to produce beautiful, beautiful limited editions. We make gorgeous content. And as of very recently, we also do beautiful public art projects. And I'm really, really excited that we're joined here this evening by Tschabalala Self, who is a wonderful artist who is in town to celebrate this big moment. And we're doing the event this evening because Tschabalala has just collaborated with Avant Arte on a wonderful project comprised of many parts. Centrally, her first ever public sculpture, which if you haven't seen it yet, you definitely need to make a trip. It's at Coal Drops Yard, just a stone's throw from here, and it will be there until January. And the public sculpture is accompanied by a gorgeous video piece that explores some of the themes of Chaba's work, and also a limited edition sculpture and a print, which when we go for a drink afterwards, you'll be able to see IRL. I thought it'd be really lovely for you just to introduce your practice to us a little bit and share a bit about the ideas that you're exploring with your work and what it is that drives you to make the fantastic work that you make.
Hello, my name is Tschabalala Self, and I usually describe myself as a painter, despite the fact that I work in many other mediums. Most recently, as Gemma described, a large public sculpture that's currently at Coal Drops Yard. And my practice in general is concerned with like the iconographic significance of the Black female body. So kind of understanding what does it mean in its reality, what does it mean as a lived experience, usually told through the perspective of my own lived experience, but also what does it mean in the larger cultural context? And in other instances, what can it mean from an existential point of view, or even more like ideological point of view? Like how does a body become a symbol or sign for other meanings in the culture at large?
Amazing. And so those themes that you just were talking about there, that's what we're seeing very much in the public work, which is a beautiful woman seated. The work is called Seated, and it's a bronze sculpture nearly 3 meters tall. It's really epic. So that it's your first ever public sculpture, as I mentioned. What was it that was so exciting about that opportunity for you, making a public work, and what were the ideas behind this specific work?
What was most exciting about making a public work is that it's for an audience that is somewhat unexpected. So generally I work with an institution, either a commercial institution or a public institution, the museum or gallery. But in both these cases, there's an audience, but the audience is always curated to some degree, because it's always about who has access to these spaces. Whereas if you put something in the true public outside, people who never intended to interact with the artwork have an opportunity to see it. And you also get a certain level of passive engagement. It just becomes something that's in the periphery of someone's eye, or something they pass when they're going from point A to point B. And that's a different level of engagement, I think. And you have an opportunity to have the work reach someone that would never normally seek it. So it's a really unique opportunity, and one that I took very seriously. I have to make other considerations too in making that kind of work. And knowing that people will interact with it that maybe weren't anticipating to, I have to, I think, be more generous in terms of how accessible the artwork is. So that challenged me in a different way than I've had to be challenged before when making works that were for, like I mentioned before, a more curated public, let it be in the museum or in the gallery.
That's really interesting, and that's something we haven't spoke about that actually so much. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about how that played out. You know, thinking about making it more accessible. You know, the work is very vibrant, it's colourful. She's got beautiful, bright yellow lips, and I can totally imagine that just drawing people in. Is it that? Is it kind of the colours? Like, what else were you thinking about that would make it a really accessible work versus a gallery work?
Well, I really mined works that I had already done before, so I took a kind of a deep dive into my own practice, and I wanted to pick a work that I felt many people from many different backgrounds and many different ages could find interesting or meaningful. So I don't want to say that I was looking for a work that was neutral. That's not the right word, but neutrality does kind of come into play. It's something that could be readily accessible and a work that everyone could find an entry point into. And for me, more so than the figure, the chair was what I think allowed that entry point, and also just the act of sitting as well, because that is a term or a gesture or an action that ostensibly is relatively neutral, but in reality is quite politicized as it relates to leisure, but also as it relates to history. I mean, sitting has been a topic that has been politicized or even legislated in the past. So I felt like that the chair itself was really that entry point, which is interesting because me as a figurative artist, sometimes you put so much importance onto the body, but it can be these objects or these things that are adjacent to the body that really hold a lot of the psychological significance in any given body of work.
Yeah, and it's great hearing you talk about it, because what you have done is very generous in that anybody could appreciate that work because it's beautiful, but then there are all these different reference points, and actually the more time somebody spends with that work, the more they will be pushed to consider, because there are so many layers there, you know, like you said, thinking about history, the role of sitting, radical relaxation, power, who can take space. I wonder, it's been really interesting kind of seeing it in situ. It's been there now for just over a week. You know, for Avant Arte, we're so excited to be doing public work because, for the reasons you shared, it means so many different people will have access to art that hadn't necessarily before. And when we unveiled the work, where I guess it's worth mentioning where the work is, it's on there's like kind of 3 paths to different schools. So loads of kids are passing it on the way to school. And when we were doing the photography last week, all these kids were scooting past on their scooters and then stopping dead in their tracks and looking at it. And it was so magical to see. I wonder, what do you hope for people to kind of take away from that experience, that interaction, you know, from the kids to the older people? Like, what if you were kind of hopeful around their engagement, their interaction, what it might be making them think, or the feelings they might leave with? What does that feel like?
Well, for me, I think with any artwork, it's not so much that I want people to leave with any kind of definitive idea. It's more that I want them to have a moment where they can actually maybe stop. So a moment where whatever they were thinking about previously, that thought is gone, and they can have a moment of transcendence. That's my real objective with all of my artwork. So just kind of giving people almost a reprieve from their previous thoughts, and in that moment, maybe they can land on something that is not even really guided by my own intentionality, but just something for them through that moment of kind of freedom, through having a transcendent experience, that they can arrive at something that was beneficial to them, some place of more clarity. They could be clearer after interacting with my work than they were before seeing it or experiencing it.
Which is part of the generosity of this gesture, of this work as well. It's gorgeous to hear you talk about that. It feels quite significant that it's in London as well, and you know, this is a really exciting moment for you in London. You also have a beautiful solo show on at your London gallery, Pilar Courier, across both spaces, on Savile Row and East Castle Street. And again, if you haven't seen those shows yet, you should definitely go and see them, because the work is stunning, but really relates to the public sculpture as well. It's all part of this body of work. But it's 5 years now since you had your first major institutional show in the UK at Parasol Unit, and it was around that time. That was kind of happening in the moment that a lot of people were starting to discover you, and you know, now 5 years on, so many people know your work, and I imagine London, that moment was a really pivotal moment in some ways. Like, how's it been being back in London and having all these exciting things happening here this past week?
Well, it's been great to be back in London. I did have my first ever institutional show here, at Parasol Unit, and my first European gallery. Pilar Corias is here as well. And it's always nice to come back to London. I feel like I get a lot of support here from my work, and I'm happy that the work resonates with audiences here. It's always nice to be able to go to a new place, a new city, and have people appreciate the work, especially because my work is, I think, so deeply American. It's nice that it's able to translate, to have kind of like cross-cultural meaning. So I really appreciate that.
And what I think we should also talk a little bit about the process, because we'll be seeing it when we go through for the drinks. We'll see the sculpture, which is, we have a small scale bronze sculpture, which is the maquette that was used for the public sculpture, and that's available as an addition. And it looks very different because it's got the bronze with the patina, and it's beautiful. But I found it really interesting watching you develop the idea for the sculpture once you were invited to participate. And it started, well, you should tell everybody how it started. I'm not going to explain, but the work that you came up with, and then how we ended up here with the support of, it was really interesting watching the Avant Arte creative production team and amazing Katie, who was making it all happen, and the fabricators in Madrid. I loved watching that kind of come to life. Can you tell us a bit about that and what that was like for you?
So the sculpture was kind of actualized from a two-dimensional work. I had a drawing series that's deeply related to the exhibition that I have up right now at Savile Row at Pilar Corias Gallery. And there were these series of drawings which I had a figure that was conflated with a chair. And this was inspired by Louise Bourgeois' Femme de Maison series. I don't know if those of you who know that body of work, but kind of thinking about how someone can become almost embedded into a home. But I was also thinking about an expression that I heard the first time here, actually in London, to become part of the furniture, someone's becoming part of the furniture. So I was thinking a lot about that in relation to another project I was working on in 2021. And I had this series of works on paper that emerged, and it's basically two characters, one male, one female, and each iteration, they are kind of fused with this chair. And I used one of those drawings. I worked very closely with Factum, which is a foundry in Madrid, and we turned that two-dimensional work into a 3D render. And it's a really sophisticated process in which they print this. They kind of do a 3D print, and we continue to work on the piece, eventually getting it cast and eventually molded and then cast in bronze. So I had never done this before, but the process was very different. It was kind of a little bit of technology, a little bit of working with my hand, and it's kind of opened up a whole new possibility for my practice, knowing that I can work with these two-dimensional works and eventually kind of make them into 3D objects.
Yeah, and it's kind of like seeing it blow up like a kid's party balloon with lots of little tweaks, but kind of come to life in the 3D. And I think it's really important as well, what you were saying there about this body of works and the furniture and, thinking about our domestic spaces, because in this post-COVID era, we're all thinking about our domestic spaces, I think, very differently and so much more. So I think we all connect with this work because of that shared experience as well in different ways. I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious that there's so many people here who've probably got questions of their own. So I'm going to hand over to anyone who might want to come in and ask Tschabalala a question. I'm kind of blinded by a spotlight right now, so maybe shout if you've got a question, because I can't necessarily see. Oh, yes.
I was in New York during Freeze when you had the talk in Soho House, and I remember Tschabalala talking about how your practice was looking at life inside the person, the people inside the home, so domesticity, and so living inside a space. And you also talked about how you came about for your performance to create also the furniture and everything else. And then looking at the images, I haven't seen your sculpture yet. It looks like, I mean, the chair is something that you use inside a home, and now you brought it back outside in a public space. So how does it relate in what you were doing, at least at that point in time in May, with your practice and looking at domesticity at the living inside to now the public sculpture? So going back in the outside in the public space. I don't know if I'm clear with what I want to ask you, but
I've thought about this recently because in the past couple years, all the paintings and works have kind of been investigating the significance of the home and the domestic space. And you're correct in guessing that this particular work is meant to show or represent a figure that's at home. But I think it is interesting to then again take that idea and then put it back out into the public. So I don't have a clear answer yet about like what the significance of it is. This is a bit of an experiment on my part. I think as the piece continues to be outside and the public continues to interact with it, I'll know better in retrospect like what the significance of that was, to kind of take this figure that was first conceptualized as being at home, like kind of in almost in solitude, then to put them into this public space and then around so many people. So we'll see soon.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more if anyone else wants to hop in with a question. But also, Tschabalala, there is a question over here.
Thank you, and it's lovely to hear this chat. I'm curious if you have any artists that you are watching out, like paying attention to these days, anyone who's like a bit of the younger generation that can follow in your footsteps.
Yeah, 100%. I think because I'm here in London, I'm going to shout out one of my favorite young dealers, actually, which is Maximilian William. He's a lot of my favorite young artists. I would say Samaya Critlow and Reginald Sylvester, two artists everyone should look out for. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everyone.
Do we have any more questions, I think?
Do we have time for another question?
Yeah, we've got time.
Okay, we have time. I'm being told we have time. I can see. Can we get a mic?
Yeah, I'm walking.
Okay, a mic is on its way.
There we go.
Hi there. Oh, that was very loud. I'd just love to know if you had a dream project, it could be anything, what would it be? I'm a massive fan, by the way, and love the sculpture. So,
Thank you. People ask me this a lot. I think if I had a project I could do, like a dream project, it might be like a film, like a feature-length film or something like that. But we'll see, maybe one day. Yeah.
Am I doing any more running around?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I should have stayed back over there.
Hands are going up.
Was it you, or was there?
I thought so.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, was it you?
No, I think it was
Just speak into the microphone. Hello. I loved hearing you talk about the transformation of a 2D work into a 3D object, and yeah, would just love to hear if might sound like quite a trite question, but do you always imagine the full 3D version of your 2D pieces, or was it a process of discovery making that 3D version of the 2D piece?
I think I actually think about things as being relatively flat, because even in my paintings, I think there's a certain kind of like flattening of space. So for this reason, sculpture has always been like a challenge for me. But this is also why I enjoy, exploring the medium, because it is challenging. I always have to kind of rearrange my thoughts and also kind of fight against my intuition in terms of like how I understand space from an aesthetic point of view. So I would say I'm actually more inclined to think about things as being flatter than they are in reality, than rounder. So.
Okay, it looks like we're ready to wrap up.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, we're not.
So just one more question. It's very difficult for an artist to think about the affect of their work from the studio in 2 and 3D. But when you make a piece in the public domain, I imagine you have to give some thought to that. Is it a fundamentally different approach, therefore, when you have to consider effect and public choreography and response, or do you still basically approach things with the same creative process?
Well, when something's going to go out into the public, in the real public, not the museum, not the gallery, you do have to have certain kind of like practical things in place that deals with like kind of safety. Can it withstand like certain kind of weight or wind or all of those different concerns? So that adds like a whole nother layer of challenges with making like a public art project. So I learned, I kind of had some experience with this, having done the Performa commission, but that was, again, an event. It's like lasted only 3 days. But I kind of started to kind of understand the difference between making something for a space that I'm more familiar with, like a space that's relatively curated, like the indoors, museum, a white cube space, a space where there's no wind, there's no sun, there's no rain. It's a whole nother ball game when things are outside. But I feel like these challenges actually just are more opportunities to make things more interesting because it kind of creates boundaries that you have to kind of push up against. So 100%, that is something from like a very practical perspective that when something's going outside, you can't be as, I don't want to say you can't be as creative because you can be, but it's a whole nother host of concerns to be aware of.
And does the public project feel like a full stop, or is your head now full of possibilities, having seen the work installed in the site that it now is?
I feel like there's even more possibilities now for my work because there's more spaces outside and in the public than there are, white cube spaces like, throughout the world. And it's more opportunities to interact with a real audience, like more people can interact with the work, different kinds of people. And it can mean something, I think, on a different level culturally because of its accessibility as well.
But sorry, I meant specifically that work. Does that now feel it has another part of its creative journey, or does it feel that it's complete?
Well, I think it's too soon to say, honestly. I think, it's only been outside now for like a week, so it's going to be part of the excitement of, the work to see like where it will end up. But really, any work you make, it has its own life once it leaves your studio. Because there are many works that we all live with today that the maker and the previous owner, they're all long, long gone. So works really do have their own lives, and their lives they can be immortal in a way. Work can live on forever. So.
And on the point of practicality outside, we also know that there is no part of that public sculpture that's the right size for a child's head to be stuck in it, which you'll all be relieved to know. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for brilliant questions. And thank you so much, Tschabalala, for being once again so generous with your time and sharing so much about your work with us. Well, everyone is now welcome to join us for some drinks through the back, and you'll also be able to see some of Tschabalala's works that are part of this project. And we'll be around, and Tschabalala will be around for more questions and maybe even some dancing. So see you all through there. Thank you.